I've always struggled with sleep. I'm kind of a sympathetic guy, obviously. And when I was living in Weehawken, New Jersey, my sleep was the worst it had ever been. And I got blackout curtains. I did all the right supplemental stuff, this and that. I did everything right on paper, and it was just, frankly, just poor sleep, no matter what I did, statistically and phenomenologically, like no matter what. Some opportunities drove me to Florida. Life changed really fast, and my sleep got better on its own I even take less sleep support supplements now and worry even a little less about sleep hygiene now, just because it seems to happen on its own. And additionally, I actually just finally got the proper sized pillow for myself as a slide sleeper. And I sleep like tremendous out of nowhere. And it was comforting and frustrating at the same time, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's stuff I tell people. The shoemaker's kids never have shoes. I was like, light exposure, cold temperature, the state you mentally go to bed in, and pillows. If you take care of those, very rare you have poor sleep. And the pillows was an absolute game changer for me.
That's so funny. So outside of the pillows, do you think it was just the increased sun exposure from being in Florida?
I think it was a little bit of both. Obviously there's the two ends of the circadian system when it comes to light dark. I think that was a huge thing. I see stars where I live now. The noise pollution's drastically down. The air quality's different. And I do spend a lot more time outside, even at night. And it's funny, I'm obviously in the sun, maybe a couple more hours a day, especially because I'm doing a lot more golf now and my resistance training. I even take outside because I have a lot of stuff at home. But my nighttime exposure to moonlight and like those dark colors in the sky is probably the same, to be quite honest, now that I really look at it, because I purposely tried to get more outside and I had a balcony. I was successful with that, but there's just certainly a human aspect of the sleep energy concept that is almost more potent than anything else.
You were driven to Florida because you were working with golfers?
Some golf work. It didn't start out as a permanent thing. It started out as, I fully intended on going back to New Jersey. Some of the changes made, frankly, my finances really tight at the moment. And I couldn't make that trip back to Jersey happen. And it was one of those things where the winds of life took me rather than me feeling I was the one driving the ship. And, the universe usually has your back. Almost all the time it has your back. And things ended up now better in a way they should be. But it was a huge transition period for me. And it's honestly led me to doing a lot less sports performance and a lot more biological tech consulting. I've opened 2 of my own businesses in the similar fields and kind of have a paradoxical shift in what I'm personally doing for work. And what I'm doing, I'm a lot more passionate in now, and just doing a good amount less sports performance, but it's still there, of course, because it's just what I do.
So what do you when people ask you, what do you do? What's your answer to that question?
It just gets harder and harder. These days, I say I'm a expert consultant in sports performance, neurology, and biological business-based support. Because there's a lot of, because the reason I say biology is because some of them are true biotech companies by the name of it. Some of them are supplement companies. Some of them are health-esque oriented companies. You know what I mean? But all under the umbrella of I come in and look at the biology of what's going on. I'm even working with a water company potentially. There's a lot of stuff in just my perspective is what I'm offering amidst a team. And I love teamwork, and I'm involved in projects that I believe are all doing good for humans, culture, and society, which really excites me as well.
It's fantastic. I mean, even if you look at something like the supplement industry, like the formulations on a lot of products are they're a disaster. So when you have someone who actually knows what he's doing, formulating these products, you could just, from a business standpoint, you could have so much more revenue. And then from a person actually helping people standpoint, it's awesome.
Hopefully. The funny part about innovation, though, is innovation is difficult because you're innovating. You're making something brand new.
True.
It's really hard to get 1 mile an hour faster when you're already fast. It's really hard to hypertrophy when you're already hypertrophied. It's really hard to get lean when you're already shredded, because going to that upper echelon of things and truly innovating, if you will, or like synthesis quite often in biological terms, is actually a lot more expensive than being the same. So from a business perspective, what we see in the supplement companies is it's easy to get going by mirroring other people's products because you've already bought yourself credibility, less marketing, and trust. Because the person or the consumer is going to look at two products, A and B, and be like, these are quite similar, the price points are similar, and then it's a battle of novelty or customer reliability, responsibility, and retainment with the original company. So there's an interesting aspect about innovation, and that's why I'm quite selective with what time-based efforts I put into a lot of companies, because I think philosophy has to match up just as much as the numbers when it comes to being successful. And I think Steve Jobs kind of taught us all that.
Totally. And what are some of your favorite supplements that you take either daily or on an acute basis for something like podcasts? Like, do you have any favorites that stand out for you?
So once you get into the realm of enhancing yourself, you, pun intended / not, are a centerpiece of it, right? So you need to know yourself. If you're someone that traditionally goes fast between the ears, like me, maybe caffeine's going to have a lower ROI than something else. And if you're someone that traditionally goes slow between the ears, maybe you go stimulant first. So once you categorize yourself vaguely, I'm someone who obviously goes fast. I try to stay away from true natured stimulants unless I'm doing a volume of work that matches that habit. Unless I'm going like in for 5 hours or more, caffeine's something I tend to go against unless, something just kind of happens. What I find personally is that, again, for me as a fast-paced person, choline-based, supplements, whether it's CDP, alpha GPC, the cytocholine patent, or in theory, you could just take a crap ton of choline bitartrate or acetyl L-Carnitine and still end up in really the same spot, right? But I think choline has tremendous return on your investment when you're a fast-paced, fast brain type of person, because that's going to be your direct substrate, your direct fuel source for being able to continue going through these excitatory sympathetic transmissions in between your ears.
I'm taking alpha GPC. I took it about 30 minutes before this podcast, and the effect that it has in word recall and in just being able to flow within the present moment. It's something super unique that I think, besides for maybe lion's mane, I haven't really seen from too many nootropics.
Yeah, it's kind of a paradox with nootropics because people oftentimes expect them to be like feel supplements. Like, I'm expecting to feel smarter. And really, when we look at biology, there's nothing that says you should phenomenologically feel something relative to X biological factor. So if you had the most creatine kinase and resting ATP possible, there's nothing that really says that you should feel awake or alert. You can feel awake or alert with creatine kinase being mega high or mega low. So it's often a expectation user error problem with these things. And again, when you start to notice a compound works well, it should be seamless. You don't want to even feel or notice it too much. What's cool about choline and why oftentimes it's associated with a feeling is choline is an easy rate limiting factor to kind of tackle in the game and equation of feeling good and all that stuff, especially when it comes to in between the ears. I think that's why when we look at the research behind alpha GPC, we see it potentially increasing rate of force production in athletes, but we also see this prevention of Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, neurodegeneration like symptoms progressing, and that whole world as well. And the reason I believe that these two kind of seemingly separated worlds of choline-based supplementation support is that linkage. It's when we see cognitive decline happen, it begins with the substantia nigra degrading, which leads to hippocampal degradation, which leads to prefrontal and limbic degradation over time. And if we ask ourselves for a brief moment, why would your substantia nigra and this dopaminergic system ever degrade? It's because you have less stuff going on in the world around you from a physical body that you're choosing to respond to. What will keep your substantia nigra healthy as you age? Because we see it happening with alpha GPC. And then again, like I said, we ask the question of, well, what's the endogenous thing? What would help that without having to take a supplement? It's creatine-like explosive dopaminergic activities. It's not necessarily just lifting heavy. Sure, that falls into the category, but this also means like running up a hill, doing some jumps, going outside and throwing rocks. Oftentimes, I talk to a lot of people in international settings as I travel or work, and they don't have access to a med ball. And I don't think you should buy one in that case. Go find a rock and just huck the rock. And the funny thing is, like, nature will take care of you. You'll get a light rock that you can throw crazy fast and get very rotational in the frontal plane because you can't obviously load the frontal plane as heavy. And you can whip that rock in the frontal plane, and that's excellent. Then you find a really heavy rock that you can only do stuff in the sagittal plane with, which is closer to your lifting heavy stuff. But people think that you have to load yourself heavy to manipulate the force production equation to have a high value and to get high amounts of neurological activity. If you were to volitionally exude the same amount of tension and force with a mega light load, you'll get the same response. And Westside verified that for us. They were huge on speed work promoting your 1 rep max. And whether they were right or wrong, we anecdotally see that mathematical manipulation being true in real life.
How do we extract what you were just saying to like a gym analogy?
Yeah, so let's say you lifted 50 pounds at 100 miles an hour. Then you lifted 100 pounds at 50 miles an hour. It's going to elicit the same thing to your nervous system. But now when we talk about reps over time and include that same analogy I just gave, if you're doing 12 reps, it's very unlikely that they're all at the same speed, tension, cadence. If you're doing, and that's going to bias your glycolytic system. If you're doing things that are more rhythmic or things that are more explosive and things that are higher on that speed and consistency threshold, you're going to be more in that creatine world. And that's why doing 3 sets of 10 gives you different results than doing 10 sets of 3. It's more about not just how the weights are moving, how the weights move and how your body moves from that physics standpoint is your nervous system. But exercise physiology and the energy systems are what's going to correct for ATP and time. Physics is a singular motion, right? You do a thing once and then there's a rebound, and Newtonian physics, you do it again. That's 2 reps. But how those 2 reps exist from a paying off the cost to do it is exercise physiology. So using creatine to pay off the cost of your reps is vastly different than using tons of glucose in a less oxygenated environment to do your muscle reps and the damage associated with them.
So extracting that out, we should do a combination of those different types of movements in order to kind of just be kind of holistically hit these different parts of our body.
Yeah, great question. I think one of my, and this is my theory and philosophy now rather than like, talking about creatine glycolysis. No one can really argue that stuff. I believe that having access to extremes both in the gym and nutritionally is a fantastic gateway for health. So what I mean is if you can fast and feel energized and then maybe overeat a little bit and still feel all right and energized. And then you can have a 0 carb meal and a 0 fat meal and still have good digestion and proper responses. What that tells us is your microbiome is probably effective and diverse. You probably have proper endogenous enzyme, bile, salt, and insulin function and creatine hormone function because you have access to those extremes. Same way with the gym. HRV is a wonderful attempt at tracking that extremes access. If you can work really, really hard and then get those sequenced R values between the 2 waves at different lengths throughout the day, you're going to have a better HRV value than someone who's very regimented. And this comes through measuring the RMSSD. And that's how you get your HRV values with some proprietary algorithms. But ultimately what we're seeing is if you can do creatine work and feel better and have it not cause excess stress to your body and do a little bit of muscle building, glycolysis, heavy breathing work, and have it not cause excess stress to your body, and then do a little bit of aerobic work. whether it's sympathetic or parasympathetic, and have it not cause excess stress to your body. Those are the healthiest people.
Mm. I mean, it makes so much sense. It's like you get that full spectrum of activities and everything in between. It makes sense why that would have this great effect on people. And then from a diet standpoint, it's fascinating to see in the age of the internet now, we have access to see these people who are doing a carnivore diet and then everything on the other end of the spectrum of zero fat or incredibly low fat, and see how all these results vary and how you could kind of get results doing a number of different things.
Yeah, it's funny to go from novice to intermediate, whether it's nutritional adaptations or sports performance or cognitive. The elimination method works really well because the two fuel theory philosophically exists throughout all of biology, whether it's nutrition, training, or your cognition and neurology. So if you are a novice at anything and you force your body to only rely on one tool, what we see is it will compensatorily support the other tools as well. And as you get better at that one thing, up until the point of roughly an intermediate, everything will get better. The problem is you shouldn't be a novice at anything, kind of based on what I just said when it comes to means of like the human body. And I know this is totally up your alley, right?
Yep.
Philosophically, nutritionally, you shouldn't be a novice in anything. And that gets you into the ball game of health in the first place. It's very difficult to be healthy if you only do one thing forever. You can make quick changes in poor health or poor fitness really fast through those singular methods. But if you want to get beyond the cost of admission to health and feeling good and being a savage, you do need access to extremes. It doesn't mean you need to do them within the same day. It could be within the same week. I often recommend that people have one day where they fast for a good chunk of the day and are typically below their food demands. And then I suggest on another end of the spectrum of the week, they do the opposite, where they're a little bit above their food demands. And then all of a sudden, that also gives you confines for activity. If there's one day where you're going to purposely eat a little extra, that should probably be the high point of your activity for the week. And there's a day where you're going to eat a little less. That should probably be more of a restorative, lower activity, or just more parasympathetic activity as day. Yoga, long walks slowly with breaks, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and that just ends up giving you more variety in your life with less friction for the things you want to do. Because the problem is compliance to real life relative to disciplined being in the zone is very different. When you're in the zone and disciplined for that 1 year, 6 months, 3 months, 12 weeks, whatever it is, that's not real life. You are in even though it's good for you, you're in a slightly altered state. You're going to get to a point where you're going to want to eat, socialize, and be off of a plan. And oftentimes the skills that you develop being hyper rigid no longer serve you when you get to that point.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a fascinating topic because if you look at the people who live the longest, like these centenarians, you know, some of them like smoke cigarettes. Like they're not these perfectly optimized individuals that we picture them to be in our head, like these Brian Johnson types. A lot of times it's like almost like they're just enjoying life too much to die. It's a different end of the spectrum from the super regimented, trying to be on top of everything 24/7. It just doesn't seem like those are the type of people who end up living the longest lives.
Yeah, we're stress response creatures at base. And oftentimes culture gets in the way of what's true biologically and health-wise. Mm-hmm. We assume and already know that being sedentary is obviously really bad for you. However, we're also all told to chill out and do less, when in reality, there's no more lack of stress than being sedentary. Besides maybe your gut taking, a beating, what else is really imposing major stressors in your life? It's the lack of stress that's causing enzymatic, hormonal, biological, gradient of electron degradation by not having stress. What we see, what's interesting, is oftentimes these centenarians, maybe they'll smoke cigarettes and drink, but they'll also have periods of time where they eat less and socially overeat. And they never let go of certain responsibilities. What we also see in centenarians is whether it's familial or working on the farm or reading or something, they all have something passionate that they refuse to give up on.
Mm.
And again, it can even be somewhat sedentary, like reading, but that does add to their life expectancy because they just don't give up. That's that paradox we see, like when one partner dies at old age and they're like very close, the other one shortly dies, because it's easy to lose your life passions in that scenario. These people, yeah, again, sure, they'll have a couple shots, maybe smoke a few cigs, but they're absolutely enthralled with dominoes. You know, my family comes from Cuba, and that's what you see. It's enthralled by something, and that's what keeps you going. Going back to that substantia nigra, right? It's that enthrallment with life and that anticipatory desire to do things that kicks on your dopaminergic systems.
It's funny you say that. My family is also from Cuba as well.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Small world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a hormesis though, right? It's like this idea that it's like the gym. It's like you need that stimulus or that load in order to get stronger and to become more resilient. And we are so focused on optimizing that we forget that it is the resilience that is what's going to get you where you need to go, because you don't always perform in perfect conditions. Like I'm sure you see with your golfers is a lot of times you don't choose the day that you have to PR in like a competition setting. Things happen, life gets in the way, and you have to overcome adversity.
In every sport, in fact, it's funny. Everyone thinks that once you get to the pro level, their competitions must be run so perfectly with no mistakes because they're pros. It's like, I swear, no knocking on any organization, because everyone tries their hardest, and it's so much harder to put on a professional sport than not sport. But the point is, every sporting event has something that goes somewhat sideways. You're running late, you're running early. They're like, hey guys, there's rain. Hey, there's this, there's that. Whatever it may be, it's not perfect for any participant, whether they're amateur, novice, or professional. And all the time, there's stuff tossed your way. You know what? I think actually pro athletes have it the hardest sometimes when it comes to performing, because they're, oh, by the way, you have a photo shoot, then you have this call, you have to show up, don't be late. Then you have, luckily, 12 minutes to get ready for your tournament. Congratulations. You get 12 minutes of free time. Isn't that wonderful? And they're like, oh, wait, it should be the opposite. But in fact, I've seen pro athletes from UFC, NFL, and golf alike all have less time than some amateur athletes that I help for getting ready for tournaments.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. And you look at like the NBA, and they're playing so many games, and they're getting on a plane right after the game at midnight and flying till 3 a.m. and then getting home
hockey,
and then having to play
that.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you just have to be resilient. And when you work with these professional athletes, what would you say your role is with them? What are you helping them with exactly?
I can always keep things super confidential because I work with a lot of specific individuals. That being said, though, I imply what I've talked about on this podcast philosophically to them and then just make it happen. So who are you? We get some testing done, blood work, genetic and assessment testing, and then look at, well, what are the gaps you have? What are the demands of your sport? What stuff matters to you and what do you like to do? What are your strengths and weaknesses? And we kind of layer out an equation where we see gaps, like I said. So maybe you participate in a creatine sport and you have excellent genetics and blood work related to creatine kinase enzymes and functionality, even in a slightly detrained, inflamed state. I don't see any degradation in alactic sports performance. Suddenly, that's someone that doesn't need to lift a lot of weights and doesn't need to do a lot of specific ergogenic training-based support. Rather, it becomes a game of nutrition, gut microbiome, stress management, lifestyle management. But then maybe there's athletes who are the exact opposite, where they're just naturally one of those like chill, intuitive people. They're like, yeah, I felt sick and I just decided to do a small fast, eat vegetables, and then overate the next day. And it's like, why'd you do that? It's like, I don't know. I felt to do that. And then it's like, well, you know what? If that's how your natural strengths play out, let's make you a biological super freak. And that's what ends up happening. And some athletes just want me to be around as an emergency button. Some athletes, it's almost completely metaphysical and worrying about how they perform. And oftentimes I talk about, ask how questions, not what questions to yourself. People say, oh, I got nervous and I started saying, what if this and what if that? And everyone tells you don't ask the what ifs, but they don't give you a replacement. They're like, yeah, just ignore it. Just be tough. It's like, oh, that works. Because when it's a real scenario, you can't just be tough. You need another strategy. So I tell people to ask how questions. Ask questions that are process-based, not open-ended. And if you ask yourself, how am I going to get this done? You're not going to say something stupid like I'm going to poop myself and make the big mistake in front of this huge crowd. It sounds dumb. By asking a process-based how question, you're immediately going to be like, all right, how do I get this done? And then the follow-up thing is logical then, instead of saying what if.
Totally. And I mean, the reason why I asked the question is because it's hard to paint you into a box, because on one end, you're focusing on all the physical performance things. And then on the other end, you're talking about breath work with your athletes, self-talk, getting them into the present moment, not letting the performance anxiety get in the way of things. And it's like this holistic picture that it's hard to put a title to what you do. I guess performance coach would be the best way to put it.
And the performance can be open. And that's also why I stay a little underground and confidential. That's why I love consulting for so many companies as well as athletes, because I just want to see epic shit happen. And excuse me if I wasn't supposed to curse, but no, I just want to see epic stuff happen. I don't think we're anywhere near the ceiling on human performance yet. And I just want to push it. I want to see the craziest stuff go down. Like, I don't want to see you hit 21 miles an hour out of the backfield. I want to see you hit 24. I don't want to see you, hit the ball like 360 off the tee. Like, why can't we get someone to hit 400 off the tee and hit it on a thread? It might not be a 1 or 2 year battle. It might be a 5-10 year battle. But I think that's how I've ended up in this consultant, somewhat underground role, because I say no a lot of times. I want to pick and choose and make sure that my vision and perspectives are completely aligned with the company, person, or system I'm working within. Because like I said, I think if you're the best at anything or really good at anything, you'll get paid along the way. And life's shown, I think, many of us that. So I really just want to see crazy stuff happen and make the best possible outcomes a real thing, regardless of what I'm a part of.
When you are pushing those limits, though, it seems like there's the conventional wisdom. And then in order to get weird results, you need to do weird things, because the conventional path isn't going to get you those unconventional results. What are some things like you think most people would disagree with you on, that you really think are going to be things that are going to either help athletes perform, help people perform better? What are some things that most people would think you're crazy for believing?
I think weights are pretty overrated. Unless you're not, just like lift resistance training. I think it's different if you don't have the strength, force production, or muscular capabilities for your sport. Obviously, then that's the perfect remedy. Like if you tear muscles because you don't have the substrate stores, or maybe you're an amazing performer but you get absolutely mutilated and wrecked for 3 days afterwards, yeah, sure, then resistance training can be a wonderful remedy for you. But what I find at the pro level, especially, and that's what's changed my perspective and the way I think and talk about so many scenarios, because like you said, oftentimes people are like, yo, if you want to get faster, squat and do more volume on your sprints. But it's like, well, these guys already did this. They're already stronger and can handle way too much volume. And how do I get someone who does that even faster already? You know what I mean? And that's what's led me to a lot of these things. So that's why I was like, weights are overrated. If you're already mega fast, you can't tell me that making you squat 700 will make you faster than squatting 600. In my opinion, it's absolutely useless. Because what I've also matched this up with to form this opinion is I love testing creatine kinase, amylase, and lipase together. The same way I like testing creatinine and BUN and AST and ALT together relative to training damage. You know what I mean? So I like to accumulate a little bit of blood markers together, like a trio or a trifecta or quad or whatever word I'm supposed to use there. I'll accumulate 3 to 5 blood markers that I think are valuable for the person, and I'll test it fatigued, non-fatigued, purposefully peaked, purposefully detrained, and then look at the differences. And then that's how I'll determine if it's working, if it's not, relative to the context of real life. And I've rarely seen guys who are already strong and fast get even faster with more creatine kinase values. once they're already high. So it's forced me to look at different things like, hey, man, honestly, do you believe you can go faster? Like, I know you believe it during the session, but when we get down to it, do you really think that you could be the fastest guy ever out of the backfield? Do you really think you could be the best golfer of all time? Because I can get your biology there, but if I woke you up in the middle of the night, poured water on your face and smacked you, I was like, are you the best in the world right now? And you hesitated for 5 seconds, your biology being the best in the world won't matter anymore. We've seen people with biology that's not the best in the world be the best in the world at shit because of that vehement belief. And when we talk about why does it feel so good to get a hug? You know, like when shit's bad, why does it just feel good to have a hug? It's the same aspect of altering limbic perceptions. Mm-hmm. You need to truly, with every fiber of your being, believe something if you want to be that outlier. The same way as you really, unfortunately, have to believe you're a very poor human to be an outlier in the negative sense as well. You know, and that's why managing blood work, genetics, metaphysics, and demands of lifestyle together are so important. Because oftentimes I've talked to a lot of people in aggressive sports like football, wrestling, fighting, who have sometimes problems, not just relaxing, but also like friendship, social problems where they're, dude, I'm like either depressed or I kind of like get upset with people for no reason. I find myself being abrasive. I find myself only being socially normal when I'm actually punching someone in the face. That has to do with your ability to recover. It's not your vagus nerve and your fitness. It's your ability to limbically switch up. You know what I mean? Think about it. Like those sports might be more fit than anyone else. You know what I mean? So why would they have vagus nerve HRV issues?
I mean, it's interesting. It's like, it's almost like unable to turn off that switch.
Yeah, it's not just everyone thinks like throw ashwagandha at it, throw this at it, like make them get in a cold plunge, make them do this, make them do that. You're trying to alter an end outcome that was attained through limbic senses, not through biological ones. And that's like the same thing. I've seen athletes who don't have the biology to do what they're doing, and they do incredible best in the world stuff. And I'm like, well, that's sick. And I've learned from them. I'm like, how are you doing this? Like your values are like average relative to the pro level, but you're number one or number two or up there, right? And I've seen guys who have like values that I didn't think were possible, where it's like, wow, that's like scientifically insanely cool. And they're not the best in the world. You know, it's like you said, that balance, that humanic aspect of having access to everything that lets you unlock yourself.
That the world of self-belief and like, it's fascinating because it's one of those things that it's easier said than done. Like truly believing in yourself is it sounds easy on the surface, but it's difficult to obtain. And I think the only real, or there's two routes that are prescribed to people. It's like the manifest and self-talk, say affirmations to yourself. And then there's the other camp that says you only believe when you have evidence that you can do this thing. How do you think we should think about improving our own belief within ourselves?
I think it starts with the reverse engineering, kind of like your archetype, if you will, of your best and worst. So when you're at your best, and we can even use some like real life examples. Like when you look at some amazing athletes, CrossFit's a big one for this. They oftentimes are religious. And it's because that's a sport, same with marathon running, where it's difficult to differentiate yourself and belief matters so much. We see this oftentimes in quite a few sports where they're skill oriented because it's so difficult to differentiate yourself. You know what I mean? Running a marathon is largely mental. Like the CrossFit games, there's a huge mental aspect once you've controlled for all the other biological ones. We see that religion gives these people this intense self-belief, and that's an archetype, if you will. We also see the villainous one working out quite well. It's not a product of good and evil. It's actually a product of self-confidence. When you play the villain role, you're like, these people don't want me to succeed, but I want me to succeed. And what you end up seeing when you look at it objectively is kind of what I said with like the what and how questions. Without realizing it, the religious person and this villainous role have set up a mental like blindfold, if you will, for themselves to have exuberant confidence. Because if they didn't, they would have quit. If you didn't truly believe as the religious athlete that your deity wants you to be the best in the world, like how else would you attain that level of confidence? If you didn't truly, because I've spoken to athletes on both perspectives, like not that I'm cross, like a deity probably doesn't care for you to be 100 millionaire. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's probably not written in religious stone that you'll be the sole singular best in the world, but you believing it matters. In the same way, I've talked to athletes who played the villainous role. They're, dude, everyone hates me. No one wants me to succeed. Everyone thinks I'm a piece of crap, and no one even thinks I'm good at this sport. And it's like, okay, bud. But regardless, their vehement belief in that allows them to not question what ifs, allows them to not worry about when your heart rate's like literally 200 almost, and you get that anxiety response from lacking oxygen. It allows them to not be fearful. So what I think is you don't have to be the religious archetype or the villainous archetype. You just need to know yourself. When you're at your best, how do you behave? And when you're at your worst, how do you behave? And then employ a rate limiting strategy. If you're the villainous one, you should probably try not to be villainous outside of sports. If you're the religious one, you should probably do some prayer or religious reading before you participate in sports. If at your best, you're kind of cocky, maybe you should make sure that your heart rate's not too high and that you're listening to music or have friends around that help you feel that confident strategy. And maybe you're an introvert when you're at your best or your worst. Then you should probably, again, employ the opposite strategy to help you balance out and be the best you can be there.
Everything seems to, in this conversation, there's so much nuance within everything across the full spectrum of life, really. And it seems like the key to figuring out what that nuance is for yourself is to know yourself. And it's the answer that has returned a few times in this episode. So when it comes to knowing yourself, what do you think the best tools are for that?
It's acceptance for sure.
Acceptance.
Because the way I see it is I was so confused, not to be a mega nerd here, but I'm about to be a mega nerd.
Please
I was
do.
so confused at the sodium potassium pump when I first learned about it because I was like, wait, why the hell would it be a net neutral charge? Like, how does that help anything? And what I ended up learning as I grew and grew and grew and kept studying, even up until recently, was it's not net neutral. And there is no net neutral. It's an acute allostatic, if you will, balance that for the moment, the dysregulation is balanced in that dysregulation. The sodium potassium pump has to do with a constant net positive or net negative charge for a small period of time being balanced before it returns to a different state. And I think that's acceptance in your life, whether it's for an hour a day or a month out of the year or for a whole year, you might have a bad time. You might get shafted. You might get a little cucked or whatever. It happens. You have to accept that extreme the same way you want to accept the extreme where I hope I have an amazing time. 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, a month a year out of 10 years, right? And far too often I see people lacking acceptance and making decision-making errors. So it's like when you lack the acceptance, the decision that was ideal in a normal scenario is not the ideal scenario when shit's rough or you're fatigued. And it's not the ideal decision when you feel amazing and have less stress than normal in life. You see what I mean? And acceptance, in my mind, allows you to be flexible in your assessment and be better at decision making. If shit's rough in life and you have no time and you're just frustrated at every means to an end, horrible time to try to peak your deadlift. Horrible time to start drinking a ton of alcohol. You know what I mean? Like those are things that you might want to decide when you have nothing going on. You see what I mean?
Totally. Absolutely. I see what you mean. It's a fascinating world because if you think about the, like I relate it back to the podcast, just running it through my own filter of my life. And there's the days that you have a big podcast and you don't sleep well the night before. And it's on those days that you get a little self-talk, like I'm not going to be good this day, blah, blah, blah. This is a big one. And simply just saying like, and that's okay. Like I slept like shit tonight. I have a big podcast and that's okay. I'm still going to perform. It just puts you at ease. And it's these things aren't as connected to success as we think they are. It's like the mindset that you take into these things plays so much of a bigger role than how well you slept.
Totally, because you have so many preset aspects of your brain that make decisions for you. I mean, you've already figured it out by now. You can't really have a plan on these things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can have a couple things, like have like a vague fence or path you like sort of want to go within based on the niche of the person and stuff, but you can't be like question 1, question 2. It's just, it makes it awkward and doesn't flow. Same with sports. Imagine, and this is what people who are bad at sports and good at sports realize this, you can't think about the thing while you're doing it. If you start your deadlift, your golf swing, your sprint, you know, whatever it is, you're, I hope my elbows stay here, you guaranteed you're going to flop. Guaranteed. The best athletes can't even tell you why they did what they did half the times. Mm-hmm. Even with yourself. Like maybe it's like a deadlift rep. Whoa, it's funny. I have one specific memory of a jump one of my athletes did one time. I'll never forget. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning at a tournament in Virginia. And we were outside doing broad jumps to prep for a morning tea time. And I think we were doing like 12 sets of 1 or like 8 sets of 2. I don't know why I'm thinking 16 total reps or some shit like that, but whatever. It was just like one of those where we were going to do a bunch of jumps with somewhat relatively short time. So it was very repeatable, like pretty much just the same rep over and over again. And then all of a sudden he jumped like 4 feet further. And we both like looked at each other and started dying laughing for whatever reason. And he's like, dude, was that crazy far for some reason? I was like, yeah, what the hell happened? And if he tried to jump as far as he could have, it would have never worked. But because he was in such a monotonous flow at 6 a.m. of like, jump, 2 nasal breaths, jump. 2 nasal breaths, jump. Hey, Andy, what are you doing? Jump, 2 nasal breaths, jump. He would have never been free enough to jump that far, right? Totally. When we watch the 40-yard dash or sprinters, the best and fastest people in the world have periods of every repetition where they're legit gelatinous. Mm-hmm. Like think Olympic lifting. Yeah, you need that if you want to be crazy fast.
Oh, there's so much there I want to dive into. And, you know, there's a quote, I think it's from like Picasso, where he says something along the lines of like, artists fail when they try to copy themselves. And it's exactly what you're saying here. It's like, I think about baseball, right? You hit a home run and then the next at bat, you're like, oh, what did I do differently that time? Like before you're like, okay, what did I do differently that time? Oh, I kept my elbow in more. Okay, this next at bat, I'm going to make sure like I keep my elbow in. But you weren't thinking about keeping your elbow in when you hit the home run. And these things it's so interesting, these little mind games we play with ourselves. And
I talk about everyone talks about bounce back from bad things.
Yeah,
I talk about a lot of times with athletes, especially because I tend to work with the ones who are on the more successful end quite often. It's rebounding from good stuff. How often do you do something good and do exactly what you just said? If I just keep my elbow in, I'm going to hit a home run every time. Mm-hmm. I was talking to a really good DH in baseball recently. And he's like, Andy, is there any technical stuff I should worry about? And he was just like, he's been killing it recently. I'm like, absolutely. Like the last thing on the planet I want you to do is worry about physics at the moment. All I want you to go up there is be the man, dude. Go up there and do your thing. And until something goes wrong and your technical coach, who is more involved with that than me, then we can talk about that stuff. But if you're killing it right now, and especially if you're one of those flows where you don't really know why, please be as mindless as humanly possible.
It's so funny. I think about the baseball games that I was at my best, and they always came on like a Saturday morning at like an 8 a.m. game that I didn't want to go to, and I wasn't really too into it. And, you know, those are just the games you perform the best in for my physiology because of exactly what you're just saying. It's like you're in that like flow of like you're a little sleepy, you're not too excitatory. It's funny how these things, our physiology is more, our nature sets us up for success in different ways. And going back to knowing yourself, when you do know yourself, you could set yourself up for more of those moments.
Yeah, because you know what's funny? Trying is actually a really bad strategy in sports. And people like hear that. That's probably one of the other things where I say that shit and people are like, Andy, what's wrong with you?
People freak out when you say that. I've seen the comments on it. Yeah.
Trying is usually a horrible strategy, I've found. And what I mean is active physical effort is usually a bad choice when you already know what you're doing. What you're better off doing is usually having faith, letting go, or at least putting in that effort before before you do what you're going to do, almost inducing like a past action potentiation like effect. So like maybe it's baseball. Sure, especially if you're DHing, I don't mind you like thinking a little bit in your practice swings. That's great. Like make sure like go through your checklist, make sure it's all cool. That's fine. But by the time you get to the plate, I want you like drooling. You're so dumb. Mm-hmm. Same thing with golf. Same thing with actually quite a few sports. I always try to use jokes to get people to learn things a little bit better. And I always say like, to everyone, I want you to be so blank and stupid that I want people to ask you if there's something wrong with you. You know what I mean? Like, hey, dude, are you okay? Are you tired? Like, are you all right? Like, is something going on at home? Or, like, what's going on? And I just want you that free, blank, and in a meditative-like state. Because when you're oftentimes sympathetic and already good at something, from a biological perspective, it's very unlikely that the wrong thing happens. The only person that's going to mess it up at this point is you. So get out of your own way. Stop tripping over your own 2 feet. If biology is good and skills are good, the best thing you can do is reduce friction and be mindless and be mindful and just let go rather than be like, dude, I'm already at 95%. I'm going to go to 98. It's a horrible choice. Very, very poor choice.
It's fascinating. I think about like the world of, or I've heard an individual one time say that in a lot of situations, whether it's business or sport, being dumb is a big advantage because you don't overthink. And there's so much truth in that because especially when you're incredibly intelligent, you could think of very good reasons why something is going to go wrong. And then you start to believe those things. And for someone like yourself, I think you said, was it on Power Project? You said your IQ was 183?
Yeah, it was something like that in my AP Psych class. I don't know how, like, there's an age correction score, so I'm sure that made it go up a little bit. And I don't even know what we took because it's funny. I was so poor with attention span in school. I would just doze off. I have kind of a vivid memory of the IQ test because I remember being so dozed out before that when I started it, I had no idea what was going on. And I was kind of like, F this. And then I remember getting to the end and almost having anxiety because I realized it was going to give me a score. And I was like, up until this point, I didn't even have any inclination that I was at all intelligent. I actually assumed I was stupid up until this point in life. I was like, oh man, I'm going to be the friggin' dumb kid in class. This is going to come back super low. And I remember my teacher, Miss Lasky, comes over. It's weird how certain things get stuck in your head. She's really? She's like, Andy, like, nice. Like, I wasn't Andy back then, but it's just what I say now. Like, I remember being just a little shocked and like kind of walking off and stuff. And then it just like kind of stuck with me for whatever reason. But yeah, I don't know what it would test at these days, but I also don't really care because like
of course.
It's an algorithmic score. It's like when people talk to me about their sleep score. You know what I mean? It's like, dude, what the hell does that even mean? You're like, you know, it's made up. Like calories are made up. You know, like
totally.
If it's not a physical, measurable force, vector, chemical, you know what I mean? If you can't actually measure it with science, it's a culturally derived phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's true. And the reason why I brought it up is because when you are incredibly intelligent, like those, it's very hard to get into the present moment during tasks. What has that been like for you, being aware of all these things and constantly helping athletes get into the present moment? How has that affected your ability to do the same?
It's actually really hard on me. I'm not going to lie. That's why I find myself slowly transitioning out of pro sports and only doing cases. I find myself like really, really feeling connected to their journey because it's really hard on me. Because of the business world and how that functions versus being intimately involved in someone's pro sports journey, it's just so much less taxing because it's like, you know, it's just business. And there's oftentimes people who are a part of a large team. And we stop at 5 p.m. and we start at 9 a.m. And outside of that, I don't really give a crap. Like, of course I give a crap about the company, but it's like, if you text me at 9 p.m., I'm not worried. Like, I'll text you in the morning, dude. And like, I'll be via email and then you get back to me. It's so devoid of emotion and pressure. And it's no one's like absolute childhood dream and no one's family's involved. Like, you know, if you're a CEO or a member of a board, you can just go get another job. Like, that's the best resume you could have. You're fine. But like, if if it's someone's, especially at certain points, I always come in during the highest pressure scenarios. Certain points of people's careers, it's like, wow, this is literally this person's entire life on the line, their family's life. The good options, millions of dollars. The bad options, literally $0. You know what I mean? And then just being a part of that person's journey, it's really taxing on me.
I can imagine.
And going back to I don't even know if IQ test intelligence. They were meant to test your job aptitude. And I think a high score just means that I can do any job I want, or I'm like flexible, right? So like that doesn't even test intelligence when you really think about it. Yeah. So like I implore people to try to eliminate as much labels as possible when it comes to stuff like that. Whether it's a chronic disease, obviously if you really have a disease, it's different. But if you have like, chronically high blood sugar levels or something like that, like don't label yourself as broken, fix it. What the frig? You know what I mean? It's more like try to avoid these things so that you can have acceptance. And I kind of think about what I said before, labels and these preconceived notions and truths that don't apply to every scenario inhibit acceptance. If you're chronically down on yourself, I'm actually not a huge fan of self-talk, but if you're someone who's chronically down on yourself, by proxy, you're going to find it difficult to be excited about something good happening to you, and you'll be difficult to believe it. Mm.
Why do you find yourself not being a big fan of self-talk?
Because the people who need it are really bad at it as a tool, and the people who don't need it are the only people who are good at it. Right?
That's fantastic. That's a great point.
Like what I've noticed is typical fast brain people are usually good at self-talk. Because if you think about it, it's like you're just going fast enough that you can like have another dialogue in your head while you're doing shit. Mm-hmm. And you're like, yeah, dude, this is amazing, blah, 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 but like you're actively working. And I've found that typically just like, because fast and slow isn't good or bad. It's just like how you operate. Like I know some of the smartest people in the world are both. Like not that they're both fast and slow. Like, I know some people who are incredible and slow and some people who are incredible and fast, right? Has nothing to do with success. But what I find is that it's, again, that balance and know yourself has become so true for me. I don't need self-talk. I do it. Like, it's just whatever. Fast brain people need to learn mindfulness, meditation, and to manifest things because that involves letting go of control. People that go typically on the slower side are people who should do stuff like self-talk, but they suck at it. Just like all fast brain people suck at meditation. And you have to work at that as a skill. I find self-talk's a bad skill as well. What I prefer is, like I said, procedural questions, like how questions, and allow yourself to open a dialogue. Because oftentimes what I've found is people who are on the slower end tend to cut things short dialogue-wise. Just like it is what it is. But I want you to work through that mentally the same way I want the fast brain person to shut up. Like if you're a fast brain and you could go from really fast to shutting up and finding peace, you're balanced. And if you're a slow brain person who can force yourself to work through a problem step by step, then you're balanced.
So we've kind of zigzagged our way through a bunch of different topics today. If you were to leave the listener with like an actionable tip or an actual piece of advice or a challenge or something that they can implement to help them with some of the things that we talked about today, is there anything that comes to mind?
Two things come to mind. They're both very succinct.
Beautiful.
The first is the power of testing and retesting. Whether it's your body comp or the gym, don't assume it's true. What's that Stoic quote as like the man in the water and like he's a different man and the water is also different? The river one? I forget exactly.
A man never steps in the same river twice because the river is not the same river and the man is not the same man. Something like that.
Exactly. No, exactly. That's how I view these things. So you could say I typically respond well to low carb diets, but every now and then you should have a period of time, like I said earlier, where you go to the high carb and just see how things go. Mm-hmm. So the power of the test retest is phenomenal in real life. My second thing is learn from failures. People always run in the exact opposite direction of their failure. And oftentimes, almost every time, what you can learn from your failures is so much more important than what you learn from successes. Failures are often signs of rate limiting factors. Successes are oftentimes a sign of balance. So if you already know you're successful at something and you got to a good place, it's just a reaffirmation, really. But a failure is like an incident report.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey man, you were unable to continue exercise due to your ability to manage hydrogen ions, which means by getting better with hydrogen ions, you will fix the problem and you don't have to go through that shit again. So like, I think instead of running away from a failure, if you just accept it and look yourself in the face and be like, I did this, I messed up, how do I fix it, etc., you're going to be way better off in life.
Sorry, I lost you for a second. But I caught the majority of that. So I think, so outside of, or I think those are two beautiful, two beautiful things that people take away. So it's the learn from failure, and I cut out for the first one a bit. What was it?
Oh, it's the power of test and retest. Don't assume something's true. It's the Stoic quote with the Riverman.
Okay, got you. So then I'd be remiss if we didn't mention injectable L-Carnitine, because, you know, when you've been training for a long time, you've been eating right for a long time, like you were saying, it's very easy to go from beginner to intermediate, but then it's hard to get from intermediate to higher levels. So in terms of injectable L-Carnitine, what do you think its applications are, and how could someone like myself use L-Carnitine in a safe way?
Beta oxidation as a whole, whether it's sympathetic or parasympathetic, is going to be the or near the rate limiting factors in a lot of places for a lot of people. So whether you notice that when you take a day off, you don't do much recovery, or you notice that no matter how excited and hard you try, you can't get like really intense in the gym. I think those are the rate limiting factors I find most useful for carnitine. Oftentimes it's usually non-training days. I think people can get the most out of it. Have a non-training day where you utilize it properly. You would either want to eat some carbs or maybe go for like a quick little jog right before you take it. Use it and then truly heal yourself the rest of that day. I think most people over exaggerate their ability to recover and under exaggerate their ability to work hard. You can usually work harder than you think, and you're worse at recovery than you think.
Mm-hmm. So the application for it wouldn't be in the fat oxidation or the fatty acid.
So it'll do that pretty much no matter what, but it's when and how you apply that to yourself that matters the most. We never stop beta oxidation or fatty acid oxidation. Like that's like from when you're in the womb till you die type of thing. But it's when do I want to see a blip in the curve, and when is that blip maximally useful to me?
Okay, so then it comes best in on rest days, is what you're saying.
For most people, because typically people, you know, think they recover better than they do and don't work as hard as they should. I think working hard is pretty much volitional and perceptual. That's why I typically recommend make your non-training days just more valuable to yourself.
Awesome. Andy, anything we haven't talked about today that you think is fundamental to your work, or anything you want to cover before we finish up here?
Nothing really comes to mind. I mean, I think this is a really cool episode. We touched on a lot of really cool stuff. And gosuperbrain@gmail.com is pretty much the best place to find me. I don't do a ton of social media or anything else. And my assistant, Emily, is fantastic at managing that Go Superbrain email and ensuring that everything gets to me.
Awesome. And Andy, thank you so much for this episode. Our first episode we did, it was the second or third podcast I had done. So I was very much a beginner, and I appreciated you sticking with me as I linearly went through all my questions. And it was hard for me to stay in the moment. Like, I appreciated you sticking with me for an early episode, and hopefully we've grown a little bit since then.
Oh, absolutely. And that's life, dude. Like, everyone needs a mentor, a support, a chance, an opportunity of somehow. Most people don't know they're talented at something until it's almost too late. They've already committed to something. They're, oh man, I'm actually pretty good at this. You know, you don't know you're good at something until someone really gives you the chance to be good at something.
I appreciate that. And I appreciated you saying yes to doing one of my first episodes. It really did mean a lot. So appreciate you, and appreciate you coming on today.
Likewise, man. It's cool to see how much you've grown since then. You've had some awesome guests and episodes since then.
Thank you, Andy. All the best to you.
Yep, likewise.